Hey, how's it going everybody? Swagkage here, bringing you guys a Dark Magician deck profile for Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. So just as a heads up, this isn't a pure version of the deck. We are running a fairly large Dogmatika package, 7 cards to be specific. But honestly, I think that the Dogmatika cards enhance this deck significantly, and this deck did take me to Plat. I started losing as soon as I reached Plat 5, so it didn't carry me all the way to Plat 1 or anything like that. But if you like Dark Magician and you're looking for a deck to take you through Bronze, Silver, and Gold, then this is probably the way you want to build it. There are a lot of URs here, so you're going to need some gems and some craft points to spare. Without further ado, let's just get into the card choices. So for the Dark Magician cards, we're running 2 Dark Magician, 3 Souls, 3 Circle, 3 Servant, and 1 copy of Eternal Soul. We don't play Apprentice Illusion because I don't think she's necessary. And we don't play Magician's Rod either because I don't think he's necessary. Now, Magician's Rod is a pretty good consistency card, and Apprentice Illusion is a decent, honest substitute, but I don't think that those cards are as strong as a lot of the other cards that you're going to want to see in your hand when you play this deck, like Judgment, like Strike, Skill Drain, Secret Village. What we do have here is basically like the bare minimum for a Dark Magician package. I think that these are all the best Dark Magician cards in the game. This is like what you would need to play, like I said, at the absolute minimum if you wanted to make a Dark Magician deck, but they honestly do the job super well. We only play 2 Dark Magician because 3 is, you tend to get cloggy hands with like 2 Dark Magician if you play 3. I would tend to avoid it, and you don't need the third one really. I've never been in a game where I was like, oh man, I really wish I had a 3rd copy of Dark Magician in here. I want to have a 3rd one on the field or anything like that. Situations like that don't come up, and you don't want him in the hand. You want him in the graveyard or in your deck so that you can put him in the graveyard and summon him with Magician Souls or revive him with Eternal Soul. Now, Magician Souls is probably the best Dark Magician card in the game. It's either this or Soul Servant, but yeah, this just does everything for you, right? Because it can summon Dark Magician straight from the deck, and your opponent can't stop the effect with Ash Blossom since it sends Dark Magician for cost. Now, they can stop the effect with Ghost Bell since it includes an effect to special summon a monster from the graveyard. But barely anybody plays Ghost Bell, so you won't usually run into it. Now, depending on how prevalent Eldritch continues to be, people might start crafting Ghost Bells and including them in their main deck. So you might have to look out for that, but really, it's definitely not a huge deal at the moment, and I don't anticipate Ghost Bell will ever catch on and be as mainstream as like Maxi, Ash, and whatnot. Speaking of Maxi, you could cut any 3 of the trap cards aside from Dogmatika Punishment for Maxi if you want. I didn't play with Maxi just because I don't really have anything to convince somebody not to take the Maxi challenge in here. We have Effect Veiler to stop people, and that's it. No Nibiru or anything like that. A lot of the time, when I was testing this deck with Maxi in it, people generally knew that if they could kill me or set up an unbreakable board, it didn't matter how many cards I ended up drawing. So I cut Maxi from the deck, but if you want to play it, which is fair, the card's really good, there are cards that you can cut from here. But anyway, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. I'm still supposed to be talking about the Dark Magician stuff. So Dark Magical Circle. This card's insane. For a while, I didn't think that it was as good as a lot of the other cards. It might be even better than Soul Servant, actually, especially in this deck specifically. So what you're supposed to do with it is look at the top 3 cards of your deck, pick a Dark Magician spell trap, add it to your hand, and then put the other 2 back in any order. And then if you don't find the Dark Magician spell trap, then you just stack the 3 cards and leave it like that. But if you have access to Magician Souls, and also have a copy of this in your hand, this thing is basically Pot of Duality. And it can be even better than that if you do happen to find Soul Servant or Eternal Soul or even another copy of Dark Magical Circle. So what you can do is you can add the card that you found, again, assuming you find the Dark Magician spell trap, then you can use Magician Souls to send this and draw a card, but it also has the added benefit, which Pot of Duality doesn't have, of not letting your opponent see the 3 cards that you looked at and put back on top of the deck. It also has another added benefit of potentially letting you take 2 of the 3 cards with Magician Souls, because if you have another spell trap in hand or on the field that you don't want, like an extra copy of Circle, or if you're low on life points, say you have 1500 or less and you have a strike in your hand or set from an earlier turn, then you can send that and draw 2 cards instead of just drawing 1, which makes it potentially even better than Pot of Duality. So a lot of people just look at this as a way to get access to Dark Magician cards, and also as a way to banish cards from the field. But this Pot of Duality thing, it is super relevant, and you will be using it for this all the time. Getting a Judgment on your first turn, getting a Strike, an Imperial Order, a Skill Drain, Secret Village of the Spellcasters, all of these cards are really good and make it extremely hard to play against you going first. So definitely make sure you're using the card like that, and don't be afraid to send it to the graveyard if you don't think that you're going to be using the Banish effect on the following turn. The Banish effect, though, is also really good. It turns Eternal Soul into an offensive card as well as like a defensive card and a recursion card. So I guess I can also talk about Eternal Soul's interactions with this. So Eternal Soul is really good. You pretty much have to play this card in the deck, right? Because it makes your Dark Magician unaffected. It basically turns it into a towers. The only way to get over it is, or the only way to get it off the field is by destroying it through battle. And the crazy thing is, even if somebody is able to destroy the card and get it off the field, it doesn't matter because you can just revive it again. It does have the really extreme, steep drawback of if it leaves the field, all your monsters get destroyed. That sucks. Usually you don't have too many on the board anyway, though. As you can see, we're only playing 10. 2 of them are hand traps, so you generally don't want to summon the Effect Veiler anyway. So most of the time you won't really care if your monsters get wiped, but the thing that sucks is if you get hit with a Feather Duster, then you lose all your monsters and all your spell traps, and it feels really bad. Like, your opponent just gains so much card advantage. It's really hard to come back in situations like that. So be careful before you flip this card up. Don't just shotgun it whenever you get the first chance to. Make sure that you've like gauged what your opponent has access to, and make sure that if you think that there's a chance that they could have a Feather Duster or a Cosmic or something for this, that you have a Judgment ready to protect yourself. But anyway, being able to summon Dark Magician back every turn and banish a card with Circle is incredibly powerful. Another thing that makes Circle so good is you can activate this and then activate Souls and special summon Dark Magician to banish something from the field. So yeah, this card working together with Souls and Eternal Soul, just really good, one of the centerpieces of your deck. Now, Soul Servant is kind of self-explanatory. I can't imagine building a Dark Magician deck where I'm able to play this card and choosing not to run it, right? You can't Ash the effect that puts a card on top of the deck. Now, just like Magician Souls, you can stop this card's first effect with Ghost Bell, because it allows you to take a card from your graveyard and put it on top of your deck too. That actually is good. It's not a bad thing. It's not like an unnecessary weakness or something that the card has. Being able to take a card out of the graveyard and put it on top of your deck is relevant, because sometimes you really need to get an extra draw, so you'll have to discard Eternal Soul. And if you do that, you can put it back on top of the deck with Soul Servant and then get a hold of it by banishing Soul Servant and drawing a card. This card also significantly increases the draw power of this deck. Back in 2020, when Souls and Soul Servant first came out, I played like just a crazy, basically like turbo draw power version of this deck, and won the sneak peek for Ignition Assault, the set where Lightning Storm first came out. And I played against Spiral, I played against Altergeist, I played against, I think, Invoked. It wasn't Invoked Shaddoll at the time, it was Invoked Mech, right? But I was just able to keep drawing and get a hold of all of the Floodgates and like trap card interruptions that I wanted. And I mean, this card's a big reason why. Now, one of the reasons a lot of people like playing Dark Magician Girl in their deck is because if you do, this card potentially allows you to draw 2 cards, which is, of course, awesome. Some people play Palladium Oracle, which is a huge no-no. That card sucks. Do not play it. The only possible reason you could ever want to is to draw a 3rd card with this, but that's it, and I don't think that it's worth it. Yes, it is nice that you could draw 3 off of this card, especially because it floats from the graveyard, but it's just not worth it. But anyway, this card also strengthens Circle, because if you activate Circle while this card is in your graveyard and you also have Magician Souls on field, then you can banish this, get rid of 2 spell traps with Magician Souls, draw 2 cards from the Souls, 1 card from the Servant, effectively allowing you to draw 3 cards in total. And if you have a bunch of, like, if you have 3 like banger cards like Judgment, Strike, Secret Village or something, that can be enough to win you the game by itself. For the extra deck Dark Magician cards, we have Dark Magician the Dragon Knight, the Dark Magicians, and yeah, that's about it. You don't normally make these cards. You don't actually summon them because, as you can see, we don't play the Dark Magician fusion spell, and we also don't play the Eye of Timaeus. I would play the Eye of Timaeus if that card was searchable, but the issue with it is the way it's worded. It doesn't say Dark Magician, it says a Dark Magician card, and since a lot of the Dark Magician stuff specifically says that it has to specifically mention the card Dark Magician and not a Dark Magician card, can't add Eye of Timaeus, which sucks. But anyway, you don't normally summon this thing, but it's nice to have for 2 reasons. First of all, it's a Super Poly target, and I'll talk more about Super Poly in a little bit. But second of all, if you send this thing with Nadir Servant, it counts as Dark Magician in the graveyard, which allows you to draw a card with Soul Servant, and that can be a lifesaver sometimes. The Dark Magicians is similarly a Super Poly target. You don't actually make it in this deck that often unless you're getting rid of a spellcaster monster on your opponent's side of the field. Sometimes you'll use Super Poly to fuse 2 of your own monsters if you need like the damage really quickly in the battle phase or something. Usually you don't make this. It's just here as like a just in case sort of thing, right? But anyway, now for all of the other cards. Effect Veiler is here for 2 reasons. One, it is very powerful, of course, as a hand trap. Being able to negate any monster effect that your opponent activates during their turn is really good. There are a lot of monster effects like Alistair, like Ecclesia, like any of the Tri-Brigades that if you stop them, sometimes you can straight up end your opponent's entire turn or slow them down significantly. But another reason to run this card specifically over something like Impermanence or Ash Blossom is because it's a spellcaster and it's a tuner. And many of you probably already know about this combo, but if you draw 1 copy of Effect Veiler, or even both of them, it doesn't matter, and you have another monster on the field, you can summon the Effect Veiler and then use the other monster to make Halka Fibrax. Halka Fibrax will summon the other Effect Veiler, allowing you to make Selene. Selene will summon the Effect Veiler back from the graveyard, and then you'll be able to make Access Code Talker or Apollosa. The Access Code Talker will have 5,300 attack points and will be able to blow up your opponent's whole field. This is why I run this hand trap over anything else, and that's also the reason why I run 2. It's not like I don't want to see Effect Veiler all the time sort of thing. It's you need to run 2 for this Selene combo to work, but it's really good. If you have an Effect Veiler and you're not using it to make Access Code Talker, it's still perfectly fine as a hand trap. It's won me a lot of games. That's why I'd suggest playing this over any of the other monster hand traps. You could cut this for Max C, but you'll probably feel the lack of the Selene engine if you do. Now, Ecclesia, Nadir Servant, and Dogmatika Punishment. These cards are insane. So first of all, Ecclesia is a spellcaster, which is important for, again, you guys might be tired of hearing this by now, but reasons that I'll get into in a little bit. She can add you Dogmatika Punishment, which is one of the most insane trap cards in the entire game. I'm honestly surprised that this is just a rare, because it's just as good as, if not better, than a lot of URs in the game, and even some that we're playing in this deck. The fact that you can send extra deck monsters to the graveyard as part of the effect is insane. Like I mentioned earlier, you can use Dark Magician the Dragon Knight, and this turns on Soul Servant because Dragon Knight is treated as Dark Magician while it's in the graveyard. Unfortunately, you can't revive a Dark Magician the Dragon Knight you send this way with Eternal Soul, because it doesn't count as being summoned properly, which really sucks. If you could, that would make this deck, like, ridiculous, because then it would make your back row totally indestructible. It would protect you from Lightning Storm and Harpy's Feather Duster, but unfortunately, us Dark Magician players were not quite so lucky. But yeah, like, a lot of the time, you'll be using this to destroy 2 cards, or if you need access to Ecclesia and you draw this before you draw her, you can activate this, send Titaniclad, and during the end phase, use it to search for her. I don't think there's any way that you can convince me to build this deck and cut this Dogmatika engine. It's seriously overperformed. There were a lot of times where this was all I saw, and I didn't see any of my Dark Magician stuff. So seriously, play these cards if you can. It's definitely worth it. You probably should craft the Titaniclad and the Antises, which Yes, I know it sucks because it's 3 URs, but it's definitely worth it, trust me. Like, you'll feel your deck power up if you start to play these cards if you hadn't been already. Then, just to close out the Dogmatika stuff, we have Nadir Servant. If this card was at 3, I would probably be playing the Fleur-de-Lis guy, the one that can negate monster effects and has 2500 attack. Honestly, I don't necessarily advise against playing him, because he can allow you to OTK, which is something that this deck does admittedly struggle to do, but he's just really bricky, which is the reason I don't play him. That said, though, if you open this card, which is really rare because it's a one-of, but if you do, having access to Ecclesia plus dumping the Titaniclad means that you would be able to search for him, so you would have the Dogmatika Punishment plus another monster negate, which gives you 2 interruptions for just 1 card, so, if you want, again, I don't necessarily advise against it. It will just reduce your consistency a little bit. Usually, what I send with this, if I'm going first, is Dark Magician the Dragon Knight, because I open this plus Soul Servant, like, all the time, relatively speaking anyway. It's rare for me to see this card in my opening hand, but if I do, it's not uncommon for Soul Servant to be there with it, and having access to any Dark Magician card in my deck, just because I can send Dark Magician the Dragon Knight off of this card is, like, it's ridiculous to me, and it makes the deck significantly better. Alright, so now that we're done with all of the engine stuff, let's talk about the more generic cards. So first of all, we have Secret Village of the Spellcasters, running 3 of this because it is broken. This might be the best card in the entire deck, honestly, and it's the reason why I decided to start running the Dogmatika package, because you need Spellcasters for this thing to work. But if you have them, this is a one-sided Imperial Order. Everybody knows how broken Imperial Order is, so I guess I can use this section to talk about it, right? The worst thing that can possibly happen to you if you're playing a back row control deck like this is somebody drops a Feather Duster or a Lightning Storm on you. You lose all your back row, and the only protection you have against it is Solemn Judgment. Now, most of the back row removal, you know, it tends to be spell cards. This says your opponent doesn't get to activate spell cards if you control a spellcaster and they don't. If they happen to be playing, like, Altergeist, doesn't really do anything to them. If they happen to be playing a trap deck like Eldritch, doesn't do a whole lot to them, though it does turn off their Pot of Extravagance. But generally, especially in, like, gold, silver, bronze, most of the time, you are going to feel how oppressive this card is. Like, you can seriously feel it, like, wrapping its hands around your opponent's throat and making it harder for them to play, because there's not a whole lot they can do to an unaffected by card effects Dark Magician if they also can't activate any spell cards, right? Next up, we have Super Poly. Card's ridiculous. It's a really, really, really useful way to get rid of threatening monsters from the field, sometimes to completely break entire board. First of all, like I mentioned earlier, you confuse dragon monsters with your Dark Magician and make Dragon Knight. This used to be a lot better because you used to be able to make Dragoon with this, but since Dragoon is banned in this game, you can't do that anymore. This was also a lot better once upon a time because dragons were a lot more prevalent. You're not really going to run into a whole lot of dragon decks. Around gold and stuff, Dragon Maid is fairly popular. I also run into a decent bit of Dragon Maid in platinum. But since Dragon Maid really only makes the one fusion monster and then passes, this is actually a really good tool against that deck specifically, because you can get the Yugioh off the board, assuming you can get Dark Magician onto the field. This card's also really good at dealing with a Drytron board, because usually they'll end on, like, Ultimateness and either Mu Beta or Beatrice. Now, if it's Beatrice, you can't just fuse them away. You have to normal summon, like, Ecclesia or something, right? Or Effect Veiler. But if you do have either of those cards in hand and also Super Poly, you can just fuse away the Ultimateness and they can't do anything about it. You'll probably still have to deal with the Heralds in hand, but that's nowhere near as bad as a Herald of Ultimateness that's actually on the field. In the mirror match against other Dark Magician decks, this card is, like, broken because you can just take their monsters, including their Dark Magician, and fuse them away into your own fusion monsters. Against Dogmatika, you can make the Dark Magicians. Against Invoked, you can do the same thing, though against Invoked, it's not really that good because they can just banish the Alistair from their graveyard. But, you know, this card has won me a lot of games. You can cut it if you want, But like I said, I think it's really strong, and for Drytron specifically, it's like busted. I would probably actually recommend cutting one of the cards I have in the extra deck, like Apollosa here. Let me actually do that right now, because this card can make dealing with Eldritch a lot easier if you use this guy, because you can fuse away a Conquistador or a Hawkero or 2 Golden Lords into him. Like, he's not broken while he's actually on the field, but you can use him to push for games sometimes, especially in the middle of the battle phase when Eldritch players do tend to summon their Eldritch monsters a fair bit. Anyway, Dynamicious here is one of the best removal cards in the whole game. The fact that it banishes is really important, because against Eldritch specifically, or against Drytron, they have graveyard recursion. They like their cards being in the graveyard. Saying you don't get to be on the field, but you also don't get to be in the graveyard is really annoying to a lot of decks. Now, you do have to discard a card, and that's pretty annoying because sometimes you have both Dynamicious and Super Poly in hand, and you don't often have 2 cards that you can afford to discard. That said, usually if you just have one or the other, discarding Dark Magician is great. You don't really care if that card's in the hand or in the graveyard. So you can cut this if you want, but I think banishing is extremely strong in this game right now. So I'd recommend playing it. You also get to bring it back if you activate a trap card later, which can, funnily enough, help you push for game. That extra 1200 has been pretty important sometimes. It's actually won me one game, so don't underestimate the revival effect. Judgment and Strike are pretty self-explanatory, right? Like, this card is just a no button, and this card is a no button for monsters. I don't see why, if you're going to play a control deck or like a trap deck, you wouldn't play these cards. They're really good. They're always going to be really good. Next up, we have Order. Already talked about this when I talked about Secret Village. This is just a worse version of that. It is a really nice backup to have if something happens to your Secret Village, though. So if you're worried that your opponent's going to get rid of one of your spellcaster monsters and they're playing like Sky Striker or something, you can have this set. Or if you just don't have access to the Secret Village, then this is basically like a 4th copy that's just a little bit weaker. Skill Drain is, I mean, like, none of these monsters really need their monster effects. Only one is Magician Souls, but Magician Souls can send Skill Drain to the graveyard for cost to activate its effect, so you can actually still draw with Souls under Skill Drain. But Dark Magician's a normal monster, and the only relevant thing that Skill Drain turns off for Ecclesia is her battle protection with extra deck monsters. That can be important sometimes. Don't flip Skill Drain at the wrong time. Like, hold it if your opponent's about to go into battle phase with a really big Link monster or something. But usually it's not that big of a deal, and you can afford to flip this while Ecclesia is on the field, because she doesn't do anything after she's summoned aside from not die to extra deck monsters. Vanities is broken, doesn't let your opponent special summon monsters. Very, very good. It's extremely fragile. It leaves the field if anything goes from your side of the field to the graveyard, or if anything goes from your deck to the graveyard. So be careful. Don't activate Magician Souls in hand while you have emptiness. And you can do it because Magician Souls, the effect doesn't force you to special summon it or a Dark Magician. You can send it to the graveyard and then not do anything. So do keep that in mind. Now, for the extra deck, 2 copies of Intis for use with Punishment and a Dear Servant. Really good removal. Mud Dragon of the Swamp, used for Super Poly, particularly for like Drytron boards or something. It comes up all the time. You really just have to be on the lookout for cards with two different monsters with the same attribute but different types. Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, really good to get rid of dark monsters from the field. There are a lot of end boards in the game that I can think of, both like right now and throughout the game's history, that end on 2 or more dark monsters. So this card's great. It can also be pretty useful to push for game if your opponent doesn't have any monsters on field and you have 2 Dark Magician or Dark Magician and Magician Souls, and you have a Super Poly during the battle phase. You can go 25, 25, 28. That's not quite 8,000, but if your opponent is at the full 8,000, then, just don't do it, obviously. Titaniclad here, useful to search for Ecclesia. This is like, this plus Dogmatika Punishment makes this a recursive loop. And really, really strong. Do not cut this card. Definitely craft it if you can. I just crafted this in the middle of the deck profile. This is a super poly target for when you're playing against Eldritch. Link Spider and Imduk are here to help you get Dark Magician off the field. You can also make them with Dynamicious, so keep that in mind if for whatever reason you need one of these guys on the field. Link Haribo is here because normally you just want to make Link Haribo with a card that you want to put in the graveyard, but the effect to reduce an opponent's monster to 0 can be relevant in games that are really grindy when you have Magician Souls but no way to protect it, so it's here for that. Halkid Fibrax is here for the Selene combo that I talked about at the beginning of the video, and Verte is here to send Super Poly. So, thanks everybody for checking out the deck profile. If you have any questions, suggestions, leave them in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe to 59 Gaming and to my channel over on youtube.com/c/Swagkage. And yeah, till next time, talk to you guys later. Swagkage out. Bye.